Whoopi Goldberg has spent decades in the spotlight, building a career that few entertainers could ever match. As one of the rare performers to earn an Oscar, Emmy, Grammy, and Tony, she has interviewed presidents, challenged celebrities, and spent years moderating heated debates on television. Very little surprises her anymore. Yet one unforgettable morning on The View, even Whoopi found herself in a conversation that pushed her patience to its limits. The highly anticipated guest was Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex. Her appearance had been promoted for days, with audiences expecting an emotional conversation about her life, charity work, and experiences after leaving the British royal family. Producers hoped for an engaging interview, but behind the scenes there were already whispers that Meghan's team had made numerous requests about the topics and tone of the discussion. Whoopi, however, was known for asking direct questions regardless of a guest's expectations. As the familiar theme music played, the audience applauded while Meghan walked confidently onto the stage. She greeted the co-hosts with polite smiles before taking her seat. Her posture reflected confidence, almost as if she expected the conversation to unfold exactly as planned. Whoopi welcomed her warmly. "Thank you for joining us," she said before opening with a simple question. "How are you really? Not the public relations version? The honest one." Instead of relaxing into the conversation, Meghan appeared cautious. She replied that she was doing wonderfully, but added that people always seem to ask the question expecting her to reveal pain or hardship. Her response carried a hint of suspicion, as though every interview came with hidden motives. Whoopi calmly explained that there was no trap. She simply wanted an honest answer from one woman to another. When Meghan suggested that interviews often came with agendas, Whoopi gently reminded her that they had never met before and that assumptions could create unnecessary tension. The audience laughed softly, easing the mood for a brief moment. Trying to reset the conversation, Meghan spoke about the freedom she and her family had found after moving to the United States. She described being able to make their own decisions and raise their children without constant institutional pressure. Whoopi listened carefully before offering a thoughtful observation. Freedom, she said, meant different things to different people. For many Americans, freedom involved struggling to pay bills, afford health care, or support a family. Meghan's freedom, while genuine, was also supported by enormous financial success and opportunities that most people could only dream about. The room grew quieter. Meghan questioned what Whoopi was implying, but Whoopi insisted she was simply pointing out the obvious. Financial security changes life's challenges, and acknowledging that privilege was important. While Meghan argued that she had spoken about her privilege many times, Whoopi noted that public interviews often focused more on loss than on gratitude for what had been gained. The discussion became noticeably more intense. Whoopi acknowledged that leaving family, enduring public criticism, and experiencing emotional hardship were serious issues. However, she wondered why those painful moments always seemed to dominate the public conversation, while the remarkable opportunities that followed received much less attention. Meghan responded that her losses required explanation because they had shaped her life. Whoopi accepted that point, but suggested another possibility, that stories of suffering naturally attracted more public sympathy, media attention, and commercial value. It was not necessarily dishonest, she explained, but it was a reality of modern media. The audience shifted uneasily as the exchange became more pointed. When Meghan insisted her experiences were genuine and deeply traumatic, Whoopi agreed without hesitation. Trauma, she said, should never be dismissed. Yet she also argued that repeatedly presenting those experiences in public could eventually become part of a carefully managed public image. Honest pain and strategic storytelling, she suggested, were not mutually exclusive. Meghan firmly rejected the idea that she was performing for sympathy. She insisted she was simply trying to help others by sharing her experiences. Whoopi remained composed. Everyone in television, she explained, has projects to promote, charities to support, and reputations to maintain. There was nothing wrong with that. The important thing was being honest about the fact that public appearances often serve multiple purposes at once. As the conversation continued, Meghan argued that telling her story encouraged others facing similar struggles. Whoopi responded with another difficult question. Was the primary goal helping others, helping herself, or perhaps both? From the outside, she said, the distinction could sometimes be difficult to see. Meghan criticized the remark as cynical. Whoopi smiled gently before replying that decades in the entertainment industry had taught her to look beyond carefully crafted narratives. Experience, she explained, often creates skepticism because she had watched countless public figures present personal stories while also advancing professional interests. As another co-host attempted to redirect the discussion toward Meghan's charitable foundation, Meghan interrupted, determined to continue the exchange. She then accused Whoopi of doing exactly what she claimed to criticize, using controversy to boost television ratings. Whoopi's calm smile never disappeared as the studio fell completely silent, with everyone waiting to hear her response. Whoopi remained composed as the conversation grew increasingly tense. She looked directly at Meghan before calmly making a distinction she believed mattered. "The difference," she said, "is that I'm not pretending otherwise. I know exactly what I do, and I'm honest about it." She explained that The View existed to entertain audiences while asking public figures difficult questions. She never claimed to be a therapist, a counselor, or someone saving the world. Her role was simple: challenge guests, encourage honest conversations, and let viewers decide for themselves. "What about you?" she asked. "Who are you trying to be?" Meghan answered confidently that she wanted to make a positive difference in people's lives. It sounded sincere, but Whoopi wasn't satisfied with a broad statement. "What difference?" she asked. "People hear phrases like making an impact or doing important work all the time. Tell us something specific. What has your foundation actually changed?" Meghan replied that the organization was addressing systemic problems. "Which ones?" Whoopi followed immediately. "Can you point to one issue you've actually changed, not simply discussed or raised awareness about, but changed?" For a brief moment, Meghan hesitated. The studio became unusually quiet. Even the audience seemed to sense that the interview had shifted into unfamiliar territory. Joy Behar quickly attempted to ease the tension by changing the subject. "Let's talk about something lighter," she suggested. "The Met Gala was recently held and people noticed you weren't there." Meghan forced a smile before admitting she had not been invited. Joy appeared genuinely surprised, saying she had assumed scheduling conflicts kept Meghan away. Meghan shrugged and replied that these things simply happened. Whoopi tilted her head thoughtfully. "Do they?" she asked. "The Met Gala usually invites nearly every major celebrity. You're internationally recognized, you've appeared on magazine covers around the world, and fashion publications frequently discuss your style. Doesn't the absence raise questions?" Meghan insisted she couldn't explain someone else's invitation list. Whoopi accepted the answer but pointed out an inconsistency. "You've publicly analyzed decisions made by others before," she observed. "Why is it acceptable to speculate about one institution but not another?" The audience murmured as Meghan's confidence appeared to fade. Another co-host suggested that perhaps the event simply had fewer invitations available. Whoopi responded that reports indicated the guest list had actually been smaller than usual, making every invitation even more selective. Meghan tried steering the discussion elsewhere, arguing that whether she attended a fashion event wasn't particularly important. "You're right," Whoopi agreed. "In the bigger picture it isn't, but it can reflect how someone is viewed within an industry." That observation naturally led the conversation toward Meghan's entertainment projects. Whoopi mentioned that several announced productions reportedly never moved forward, and noted that business partnerships in Hollywood often evolve for many reasons. Meghan replied that creative projects require patience and that development timelines frequently change. Whoopi acknowledged that entertainment is unpredictable, but pointed out that audiences often judge public figures by completed work rather than announcements. "People don't remember the ideas," she said. "They remember what actually reaches the screen." Meghan defended the work being done behind the scenes, insisting meaningful projects couldn't be rushed. Whoopi nodded but continued pressing for specifics. From the public's perspective, she said, they see major announcements, significant resources, and then very little finished content. Naturally, people start asking questions. Meghan argued that critics focus too much on setbacks instead of successes. Whoopi responded that scrutiny comes with public life, particularly when expectations are high. At that point, Joy once again stepped in, hoping to redirect the conversation. "Let's talk about Harry," she suggested. "How is he doing?" Meghan's expression changed almost instantly. She politely declined, saying she preferred not to discuss her husband during this interview. Whoopi looked surprised. "I understand wanting privacy," she said, "but much of your public work has been presented as a partnership. Your charitable initiatives, your media projects, and many of your public appearances have involved both of you." She paused before asking another thoughtful question. "If we set that partnership aside, what do you most want people to know about your individual work?" Meghan replied that she had her own identity independent of anyone else. "I'm sure you do," Whoopi answered. "I'm simply asking how you've chosen to present that identity to the public." For several seconds, Meghan searched for an answer while the audience watched silently. Finally, she shifted the conversation herself, saying she wanted to address recent rumors surrounding her marriage. "Reports suggesting separation," she said, "were completely false," adding that she and Harry were stronger than ever. Whoopi nodded respectfully. "I'm glad to hear that," she replied. "No one benefits from rumors replacing facts." The exchange briefly softened the atmosphere, but the challenging questions and the growing tension in the studio were far from over. The atmosphere in the studio grew even quieter as the interview continued. After Meghan firmly denied rumors about problems in her marriage, Whoopi acknowledged her answer with a nod before making an observation. "Interesting," she said. "I only asked how Harry was doing, but your mind immediately went to separation rumors. Why?" For a moment, Meghan appeared caught off guard. She explained that constant media speculation had made her defensive, and that she was tired of having to respond to stories about her marriage. Whoopi replied calmly that she hadn't asked about rumors at all. She had simply asked about Harry's well-being. In her view, the leap to addressing tabloid headlines suggested just how much those stories occupied Meghan's thoughts. Meghan pushed back, arguing that journalists everywhere, whether in Britain or America, asked the same kinds of personal questions while claiming to be different from one another. She said the scrutiny never truly ended. Whoopi listened before responding in a quieter, more personal tone. She spoke about growing up as a black woman in America and spending decades in the public eye. Throughout her career, she explained, she had experienced discrimination, criticism, and relentless public judgment. She understood what it meant to live under a microscope. "I understand struggle," she said, "but I also believe circumstances matter." She pointed out that hardship and privilege can exist at the same time. Someone can face genuine challenges while also benefiting from opportunities unavailable to most people. Ignoring either side, she argued, creates an incomplete picture. Meghan insisted she had never denied the advantages she enjoyed. Whoopi acknowledged that Meghan occasionally mentioned her privilege, but suggested those acknowledgments were usually followed by explanations that shifted attention back to hardship. "You often say you're fortunate," Whoopi observed, "but then the conversation immediately returns to what was taken from you." According to Whoopi, that pattern shaped the public narrative. She asked why discussions rarely focused on the successes that had followed Meghan's departure from royal life: the financial security, media opportunities, charitable projects, and global platform. Instead, interviews often centered on conflict, loss, and disappointment. The audience remained completely silent. Whoopi continued carefully, saying that when a project failed to move forward or an invitation didn't arrive, the explanation often seemed to become unfair treatment rather than ordinary setbacks. She wasn't dismissing disappointment, she explained. Rather, she wondered whether every obstacle needed to be viewed as evidence that someone else was responsible. Meghan's expression hardened. She argued that she had every right to defend herself against criticism and misinformation. Whoopi agreed that everyone deserves the chance to respond to false claims, but she also suggested that constantly viewing events through the lens of persecution could become limiting. At some point, she said, it's worth asking whether every disagreement is proof that people are against you, or whether some situations are simply part of life. That comment appeared to be the breaking point. Meghan rose from her chair, clearly frustrated. I don't have to sit here and be lectured, she said. Whoopi remained seated, her voice steady. You're absolutely right, she replied. No one has to stay in a conversation they're uncomfortable with. She added, however, that leaving difficult interviews whenever questions became challenging could create an unfortunate pattern. Meghan denied that she was avoiding anything. She insisted she was refusing to accept disrespect. Whoopi responded that asking direct questions wasn't disrespectful. It was the purpose of an interview. Public figures who openly discuss their lives naturally invite public curiosity. My job isn't to agree with every answer, she explained. My job is to ask follow-up questions. Joy Behar attempted to calm the situation by suggesting a commercial break, but Meghan interrupted, insisting she didn't need a break. What she wanted, she said, were interviewers who didn't twist her words. Whoopi slowly shook her head. I haven't twisted anything, she answered. I've simply repeated your own statements and asked you to explain them. The room became almost completely silent. The other co-hosts watched without interrupting as the audience followed every exchange. Looking around the studio, Meghan seemed to realize the discussion was unfolding very differently from what she had expected. You've turned everyone against me, she said quietly. Whoopi's expression softened. I haven't turned anyone against you, she replied. People are listening to both of us and reaching their own conclusions. She pointed out that her questions had been straightforward. How are you? How is your work? How is your family? Those were questions she asked many public figures. Meghan picked up her purse, still visibly upset. She admitted she had expected a more sympathetic interview because she believed Whoopi understood what public scrutiny felt like. I do understand it, Whoopi answered. I've spent decades being criticized for my opinions, my career, and even my appearance. She paused before offering one final thought. I've learned there's a difference between unfair criticism and honest questions. If every difficult conversation feels like an attack, eventually it becomes impossible to tell the difference. That's when the real conversation stops, not because people are hostile, but because you've already decided they are. The studio remained silent as both women looked at each other, knowing the interview had become far more memorable than anyone had expected. Meghan's expression hardened as the conversation reached its most emotional point. Speaking in a quieter but colder tone, she looked directly at Whoopi. You have no idea what I've been through, she said. Whoopi nodded gently before responding. You're right. I only know what you've chosen to share publicly. She explained that she wasn't claiming to understand every private struggle Meghan had experienced. However, she could only respond to the words, interviews, and behavior that had been presented to the public. From what I've seen, Whoopi continued, you seem deeply guarded. You say you're happy, but you often appear prepared for conflict before the conversation even begins. Meghan immediately insisted that she was happy and thriving, repeating what she had said earlier in the interview. Whoopi accepted her answer, but quietly questioned whether her reactions reflected that confidence. People who feel secure don't usually hear hostility in every question, she observed. You keep telling us you're doing well, but your responses suggest you're expecting to defend yourself. Meghan argued that her reactions were simply a response to the questions being asked. Whoopi disagreed. She pointed out that the discussion had started with straightforward topics: how Meghan was adjusting to life in America, what projects she was working on, and how her family was doing. In Whoopi's view, those were ordinary interview questions that most guests answered without difficulty. The hostility you're responding to, she said, isn't something I've intended. It feels like you're hearing something beyond the words I'm actually saying. The studio remained completely silent. For several seconds, Meghan stood motionless, seemingly weighing her options. Walking away would end the interview, but staying meant continuing a conversation that had become increasingly uncomfortable. Finally, she announced that she was leaving. Whoopi didn't stop her. "That's your decision," she replied calmly. "But before you go, I'd like to say one thing." Meghan paused near the edge of the set. Whoopi's tone softened noticeably. "I think you've experienced real pain," she said. "I believe some of the criticism you've received has been unfair, and I don't dismiss that. But I also think you've built so many defenses that you've started treating everyone as an opponent." She paused before adding, "I wasn't trying to hurt you. I was trying to understand you." Meghan answered that Whoopi simply didn't understand. "I wanted to," Whoopi replied. "But every time I asked a question, you assumed I was attacking you instead of trying to connect." For a brief moment, neither woman spoke. Then Meghan turned toward the audience one final time. "You know what's disappointing?" she said. "I thought you would understand because you've faced prejudice and unfair treatment yourself. I thought we'd have common ground." Whoopi nodded thoughtfully. "I believe we could have," she answered. "But common ground depends on honesty from both people." She explained that throughout the interview, she had felt every answer was carefully managed, every response measured, and every statement delivered with extraordinary caution. "I'm not saying you're dishonest," she clarified. "I'm saying it feels like you're always presenting a version of yourself rather than simply being yourself." Whoopi reflected on Meghan's background as an actress, noting that years of performing can make it natural to think about presentation, timing, and audience perception. "The challenge," she said, "is that if every public appearance feels carefully produced, people eventually start wondering where the real person is." Meghan shook her head. "You're completely wrong about me," she replied, before turning and walking toward the exit. The sharp sound of her footsteps echoed across the studio before a door closed somewhere backstage. For several long seconds, no one at the table spoke. Finally, Whoopi faced the audience. "Well," she said quietly, "that wasn't the conversation I hoped we'd have." She admitted she had expected a thoughtful discussion that might reveal common experiences despite their different lives. Instead, she felt the interview had become a series of misunderstandings in which even simple questions were interpreted as personal attacks. "I'm not interested in insulting anyone," she continued. "I genuinely hope she's doing well." She then shared one final reflection. "Curiosity isn't cruelty. Asking questions isn't the same as passing judgment. If every question feels threatening, sometimes it's worth asking why." The audience responded with supportive applause, not loud or celebratory, but appreciative of the calm way the difficult exchange had been handled. The interview had lasted less than half an hour, yet its ending ensured it would be remembered long afterward. Viewers debated whether the questions had been fair or too pointed, while others focused on how quickly a conversation intended to build understanding had instead become a confrontation. Whatever conclusion people reached, the discussion continued long after the studio lights went dark.